a week or two ago, before when we were planning this, I posted on social media about I was going to be interviewing and a leader in the Jesus movement, and just said, what questions have people got? So I've got we had a number, but I put out a few here. So if it's okay, I'd like to just give it a go for the next little bit, and then we'll wrap up. So someone asked this, I think you've touched on this a bit, but let's just check we've covered it. So the question was, how much lay leadership versus Bible college trained or ordained leadership was there? So yeah, how does that work?
Well, almost all of it was lay leadership. If you look at the Jesus movement in Southern California, the people who came up, the Horizon Christian Fellowship in San Diego, which spawned the Rock, which is the biggest church now in San Diego. Mike McIntosh came up out of Calvary Chapel. Mike had done LSD. He thought that he had blown half of his face off with a shotgun. He believed that for years until he found Jesus. Greg Laurie starts as a 16-year-old kid. Those guys eventually went to seminary, but everybody started out without seminary. Zach Nazarian, the guy who pastors Hope Chapel Hermosa, came to us. He's a pharmacist. We discipled him. Eventually, he went to seminary. So there was the seminary involvement, but by and large, it just wasn't there. And by and large, I've heard you, I won't repeat what you said, but I heard you make a statement about how seminary can interrupt the regenerative process of the church. So it was largely a lay-driven movement. If you look at Bill Hybels was a youth director in a church, and they were doing exciting things. He went to seminary after the church got started. This is the story over and over. On the other hand, you look at a Rick Warren, who is a product of a seminary, but is the kind of guy who gives permission for a lot of things to happen. And so I think the issue isn't that seminary is bad or Bible college is bad. It's that the systems tend to slow people down.
Yeah.
And this idea of following the Spirit and permission giving and mixing it with love, those are the things that are going to count.
Yes, so good. Love it. Next question is, I might tweet this question. So the question was, how far was the planting? I assume churches and micro churches, all sorts of different forms, organized or organic? And I reckon my tweak is it's probably going to be on the range, but just talk a bit to that kind of topic of, and the lesson you take out of that for you, exhorting people today as well as they look to multiply.
Well, there's kind of a spectrum. On the one hand, everything is highly structured and highly controlled. On the other hand, the monkeys run the zoo. And I had a mentor say at one point, you want to be about 3 degrees away from the monkeys running the zoo. And that one stuck with me a lot because I had seen the college that I went to. It was a great school. I loved it. But almost everybody failed at ministry when they came out. Right. And about 15% of us actually were there 2 years later doing stuff. And so I saw the weakness in this. When we came up, we were kind of overly organized. Then we began to release things, and good things happened as a result of that. And so on the other hand, I had a friend, and I mentioned him earlier, Roy Hicks Jr., the guy that taught me about forgiveness and permission. They pinned a map of Oregon. He was in a town called Eugene, Oregon, second biggest city in the state. And they went and pinned a map where every place that there are 15,000 people or more, we're going to plant a church. And very quickly, they planted 60 churches. And he ran a little Bible school at 5:30 in the morning. You had to get up and come to this thing. They were far more organized than we were. Roy eventually left that job, become a missions director for a denomination, and he passed away. Unfortunately, we lost a leading light. We, on the other hand, just the way that things were in Southern California, we were so spread out, we couldn't run a Bible school effectively. We actually did for a little while. And we realized that we're also cutting off people from ministry. We get them doing so much homework that they drop out of doing the ministry that brought them into to the school. And so we backed away from that. And so for us, everything became organic. And if I have to lean, I want to lean toward the organic. I don't want the monkeys running the zoo, but I want there to be a lot of freedom. One of my friends is leading a movement of coffee shop churches that are just popping up all over. And they're starting in Catalina Island, where there's only 3,000 full-time residents. Who can afford to plant a church there? But you can do it for free in a coffee shop.
Sure.
They're in Malibu, California, where if you've got $1 million, you probably can't plant a church, but you can do it for free in a coffee shop. And that one now is spawning a number of others. And somebody invited them into a big house. So you got 60 people in the movie colony in Malibu. Things that you couldn't do if you tried to do it through the organization.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I look at the people who were more organized than us. And these are the regrets that I have. I regret that we didn't have some sort of an annual gathering. Even if people around the world couldn't all get there. I did a lot of travel to those places, but I regret that we didn't gather people together. I regret that we didn't have a little better controls on people, but I wouldn't know what controls to bring. I can look at the leaks and the places where in succession, a guy who we believed in, we discipled, we raised him up, and then he wrecked it. We've seen that numerous times, and I think we should have had better controls. Although I don't really have any answers. I can observe the failure in our movement, but I don't really have solutions. And the solution I wouldn't have would be to force everybody into seminary and do the thing that the church does today.
Yeah. I mean, just a reflection, it strikes me that there's always this tension in any form of leadership, but particularly in church life, where either our primary driver is we want to make sure nothing messes up, and so it becomes super structured, but there's not a lot of life. You're a long way from the monkeys. Or you go the other way, where it's kind of like anything goes, but you do get a lot of fallout. And so it's just trying to, and that line's not a static. It's going to, yeah. Okay, someone else change the topic. Within the movement, what were people's attitudes to the Vietnam War, especially with regard to Jesus as the Prince of Peace?
At that time, the liberal churches were against the Vietnam War.
Okay.
The more conservative churches were probably in favor of it because of submission to government.
Okay.
And in the Jesus movement, it was pretty much the same. It was we want to submit to the Lord by submitting to our government. There wasn't any kind of that I was aware of ever any kind of backlash to the Vietnam War. And we had a lot of Vietnam vets, broken people that were coming to us, but there was never any anger toward the thing that broke them. There was only love and compassion toward helping them get their life together.
So interesting. A related question, I'll just read it out and then you can answer it how you wish. I'd be interested to hear Ralph's perspective on how the free-spirited and winsome Jesus movement was followed up fairly quickly by politically conservative Christian evangelicalism. So I think there's some experiences behind that question, but speak to that as much as you wish.
Wow. I need again to qualify. I always qualify. I remember when the Jesus movement was over. I've told this story numerous times, but I was sitting in the church parking lot, which by this time we had moved out of. We were in all these buildings up and down Manhattan Beach Boulevard. We finally got this bowling alley that's up on stilts. It's an acre of ground with an acre of building raised above it.
Wow. And
so I'm under the building in the parking lot, and I'm angry at my wife and a young woman named Billy Boyd. Her husband was the first person I had really discipled intentionally when he was 16 and I was 22. And now he's our youth pastor or something. And Billy became our women's pastor, but we didn't have a women's pastor. My wife and Billy Boyd started a women's Bible study or I guess it was, they were going to have dinners once a quarter, something like that. And I was angry because everybody knew that you don't do that. That's program church. You don't do softball. You don't do dinners. You don't do stupid stuff like that. You might do a love feast, but you just get in the Word and you worship, and God blesses, and people get saved, and they go out in the street and lead their friends to the Lord. And then it hit me, it's over. That's what was going on. And then it hit me, you're not so smart as you think you are. Because all of us that were leading in the Jesus movement, we'd be together at a youth camp where a bunch of young guys were teaching, and we sit up at night telling stories. And there was an element of, I made this happen. And I began to realize, sitting there in that parking lot, I actually cried tears. I was angry and frustrated and hurting that it's over, and now I got to go do church, sort of like we did church before, only different. But at the same time, we were very aware that these young guys that were coming up just a few years younger than us sold the movement down the river, and angry. It was like, these people are sellouts. They've taken what we gave them in terms of crowds of people,
right,
and they've turned it into this highly programmable institution.
right.
And then very quickly, and not as quickly as I think people would, whoever asked that question would think, the church that was born from the Jesus movement, that first went seeker sensitive, seeker driven, programmy. And that was all about people returning to church, which was pretty easy when people had grown up in children's church, or they had grown up in a vacation Bible school or whatever, and now they're in their late 20s and they got 2 kids, and we're going to invite you to bring your children to our church. And kind of the mantra was return to church. Right. But what about people who never went to church? Because that's who we were reaching.
Yeah.
But a lot of those people that we reached off the streets then turned into this other thing. And then several years on, it turned into this politically conservative thing that would, do what it's doing today. The whole anti-mask, anti-vax, anti-Ukraine war, all of the things that are going on in the church today. I think something happened that wasn't healthy, that we lost what the Spirit had given us, and we lost it very quickly within just a few years. The numbers were still there, but the leadership changed.
How do you think it got lost?
I think that this idea of what we see as success, outward success, numbers, money, people get grubby over money, and I think we lost it to the outward forms of success. Again, I can look in my own denominational experience, kids I grew up with that were, I would see them at youth camp because we came from all over the Pacific Northwest to go to this camp. And so I knew these people, and they were 3, 4, 5 years younger than me. And then I went to this Bible college, and then I went out in this wilderness called the Jesus movement, because everything was different. And I see these guys coming up behind us, and as they get into positions, power meant something that didn't mean to us. Money meant something it didn't mean to us. And so this whole idea of prestige that comes around having numbers and all of that, we just didn't care about those things. I mean, that's why we never kept records. We never counted how many churches that all came later. We just did what we did. And one of the things that frustrates me about the church, and I see this in my own church culture, the charismatic church culture, is that when we think of the supernatural, we tend to think of, I was with a group of people recently where pastor had done a really marvelous teaching on the weekend about ministry in the Spirit to each other, or to ministry in the Spirit, period. He was thinking outward. Everybody in that group, and there were probably close to 40 people in the room, everybody had a story to tell about how the Lord had convicted them about ministering to another person, but it was another person that attended our church.
Right.
Nobody but my wife and myself had a story about our neighbors. Everybody, it was all
yes,
centered on the congregation. I think we've lost any kind of a missional heart in the church in America today. And I would say that in the charismatic church, and I would say that in the non-charismatic church, we're all about us. Yeah. And we need to be all about them, whoever them are.
Yes, wholeheartedly agree. So as someone who feels deeply called to helping the church rediscover its naturally supernatural identity, for us, for Hannah and me, it's always got to be expressed through discipleship and through mission. Otherwise, it just becomes a Christian bless me party. And we've been around situations where that's all it seems to have been, and it's very frustrating. Okay, 2 more. Oh, sorry, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things that in an era when the world around us has turned off to the gospel, what we have found is that you can penetrate those screens, those anti-Christian, anti-church, science has proved that God doesn't exist, all of that, by teaching people to kind of lurk in your friendship and wait for your friend to complain about something, and then ask permission to pray. Because as soon as you do that, the most ungodly person is going to be looking up almost defiantly going, are you going to do this or not? And then the conversation changes, and God answers prayer. And when the supernatural happens, people, the barricades crumble.
Yes, I agree. Can I pray for you? I think is one of the most powerful things any believer can say to someone. Yeah. All right, 2 questions to finish.
Okay.
As you look back at the Jesus movement, what is your greatest sadness or regret? I don't necessarily mean personally. I mean, it could be if you want, but just overall.
I think that it too quickly began to fall prey to institutionalism. And I would, and again, I get this reputation for being anti-seminary, and I am not. I just think that we should send people to schools after we've discipled them to be pastors and church planters. And I think that some groups that I know, some that we've named in this time together, they too quickly allowed that institutional factor to take over their leaders, and we lost some of the most powerful things that we had. That's, to me, is the, that gets back to the monkeys running the zoo thing, that there needs to be permission giving, and the wild and wacky needs to happen. I was at this conference with these people doing microchurch, and I met a guy he's an internet personality named Richie the Barber, and he's a clown. He actually has tattooed his face like a clown. I mean, before he found Christ,
wow,
wild, extreme. His hair looks like Bozo the Clown, which sticks up and it goes out on the sides, orange, dyed, and a real funny guy, real personable. And almost as soon as he accepted Christ, he's got this big internet following. He starts preaching, and then he's wanting to plant a church, but now suddenly he's in a Bible school, and it's like, oh, what are you going to do to this? This is one of the most radical people I've ever seen, who is motivated and missional.
Yeah.
And please, let's add something to him, because Bible school will do that. Let's not take something away from him, because a Bible school can do that. And so, as I look at it, I think we shut it down a little too quickly.
Final question. Thinking positively, then, because that was a negative question. Thinking positively, what would be 2 or 3 things, or it could be one thing even, that you would want to encourage the next generation of leaders to learn from the Jesus movement, from the Jesus people?
My friend Todd Wilson always says cracks and crannies. Most people say nooks and crannies. What I'm seeing in the microchurch movement that's developing, I see the microchurch as a bit reactionary. And I think it's healthy, but we're reacting against what we see as overprogrammed church. We're reacting against what we see as over middle class church. We're reacting against government that isn't supporting where we're going in terms of the message of the gospel. But as a result, what we're doing, DMM kind of things, we're getting into what Todd calls the cracks and crannies of society. I've got a podcast that I'm about to produce in a couple of days with a guy who has prostate cancer. He's 58 years old, and he started a Zoom church for people with prostate cancer.
Wow.
So who is organizing their church to minister to the people? And these people don't all live in the same community as this guy because of Zoom. They're far apart. I lead what we call a digi church every Thursday night, and we've been as far away from each other as Tennessee, Texas, and all over California. I'm seeing a friend of mine moved to California from Florida to plant a church in Oceanside, California. Ended up on the beach doing s'mores, and it was kind of like the Jesus movement. People come down the beach, they got a guitar and a fire, because you can do fires on the beach there, and they're roasting marshmallows. What are you guys doing? Well, come on, join us. And 30 minutes later, somebody's accepted Jesus.
Wow.
Well, now this is just, they're popping up these beachside churches all over. I got a text from him this morning. Here's the church my son pastors. And everybody has a job and, is able to go about their business. And so I would say that we really need to be thinking about all the people groups who are not white or black middle-class people, because that's what the mega churches are, who are poor or who are broken, who are extremely wealthy, who have something that bonds them together. To me, a church of lawyers who play golf on Saturday mornings is viable thing to think about. I've only in my life tried to ever proselyte one man. There was a man that I knew in Hawaii who at one time was the CEO of the largest bank in the state, and he's very much turned on Christian. The bank would host events monthly for pastors so we could share best practices, and really great guy. He was in another church and they gave him a little pastor's card. He retired then. So he's a very young guy, retired in his 50s, very wealthy guy. And they gave him this little business card, and he showed it to me, and he'd come to our church about once every 8 or 10 weeks. But I aggressively tried to get this guy and get my hooks into this guy, because where we were at the time, I had left the big church. We're in a place called Kahala in a movie theater, which is like the Beverly Hills of Hawaii, but we're a middle-class church meeting in a high bucks neighborhood. The neighbors weren't coming to our church. This guy lived up on the hill.
Okay.
If I could get a hold of him and he could start a house church among wealthy people in Hawaii, the gospel could penetrate a culture that it wasn't touching at all.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lesson in that needs to be learned, is who are the pockets of people around you? And how do you motivate your people? Because usually there's someone from that pocket of people who are with you. Yeah. So they're enough like us that they can tolerate us, but they're enough different from us that they spend most of their time with these other subset of people. How do we missionally, in an organized fashion, begin to present the message in a way that our people are penetrating their natural habitat, if you would?
It's brilliant. Ralph, I'm so grateful for you, well, personally for your friendship, but just your ministry, your impact upon the church, all the resources you've put out over the years. In a minute, I'm going to ask you just how people can connect with you, and if there's any particular books of yours that you would want to recommend that would be a good starting point for people to get into what you do?
Yeah, you could connect with me. Just my name, ralphmoore.net. And on there, I do a blog every other week. There's a podcast weekly. And there are some courses. There's 3 courses up right now on multiplying churches and making disciples. There's going to be more. There actually have got about 7 in the can. And so that's there. I wrote a book called Equipping Everyday Missionaries that I think would be useful to pastors and leaders to help their people understand how to use prayer and the things of the Spirit to reach into the culture around about, and how to get people on mission, how to get the pastor thinking missionally a little more than most pastors do.
Love it. Well, I'll put those in the notes that go with this. Ralph, I think the best way we can finish, would you pray for the folks who are watching? Well, I'm going to let you pray, whatever it is on your heart to pray over people.
Father, my prayer is that you'd give us wisdom and discernment, guidance from your Spirit. Show us how to do the things that we crave, that we long to do, that show us the roadblocks, the friction, the stumbling blocks that are in the way, so that we can remove them, the growth restricting obstacles. Show us the fields that are white to harvest. Show us those people around us that want nothing to do with our gospel, but have a lot to do with each other, and how we could penetrate those mostly small groupings of people in their natural cultural setting. Lord, I pray particularly for the young people that are here, that their fires would be fanned and not put out. That people who are seeing things differently and wanting to do things differently would have the courage to follow your Spirit. And Lord, mostly I pray that your Spirit would lead and guide and bless, or that there be an overlay of grace and action in the lives of the people who are listening today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Ralph, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate you.